let's talk about someone who I know you respect very much, who has recently passed. His name is Richard Taruskin. And I want to know, first of all, why he is so important to you and why he should be important to all of us.
Richard Taruskin, scary polymath. Okay, so he started performing early music in New York. Comes from, a family where they spoke Russian. So he's like knows Russian, the god of all Russian musicology in America. Knows all the usual European languages too. So if you come from that kind of family, that's not a bad privilege to start with, because musicologists often have to read sources in other languages. And if you don't know the languages, because you're from America, and if you start in San Diego and drive 3,500 miles, you're in Maine and they're still speaking English with an accent. Whereas if you were in Europe, that's 5 language groups and probably 25 languages you've just traversed.
Yeah.
Um, so it's, there's Richard had all that. He had all that equipment. He also had just one of the most rapier minds there is. And he was merciless about cutting you to pieces if you were full of crap. And he was widely resented for that. And similar cultural background. And I respect that because I was raised that way. So here's an example. The first scholarly paper I ever gave, it was up at UC Davis. There's a musicology meeting. I had 1 more year left in my doctorate. It was about Hungarian gypsy style in Schubert and Brahms and that kind of stuff. I did a lot of work on that. And I made it a point to, since everybody there was like doing PhDs and stuff, I made it a point to work in a bunch of piano playing. Oh, it's like that passage in Liszt where, play something a concerto I'd played, or, you throw this stuff out there very nonchalantly because, it's theater. You're performing. When you give a lecture, you're performing. So I tried to, play on that. Richard came up afterwards, and Stanford and Berkeley have this us and them thing about each other. Berkeley's department is, it's larger and they have more funding and so on. One of the real big musicology funds. So Richard comes up to me afterwards and says, I appreciated very much your virtuoso. I said, talking like a pianist. I said, oh, did you hear the mistake in such and such? And he just rolled his eyes and said, yeah, right. Yeah, you've made all the mistakes, yeah, whatever. Like, and the message was clear. Don't pull that crap with me. And then he corrected my pronunciation of a Hungarian word, which I was reading as if it wasn't, pronounced that way, because I had no connection with Hungarian people. And, it was there. And I just appreciated the fact that he complimented me and then didn't let me go any further. No, I'm going to teach you something. I tend to be grateful when people teach me things. My parents were teachers. I win. That's free profit. I win. And if you do it in a snobbish way, I'll evaluate the content and maybe I'll not respect you, or maybe I'll think, wow, you have really got the goods and it's easy for you to be impatient, and I'll take it. And now I'm another step higher. And that was Richard. And I saw him many times at various meetings over the years, small local ones at Stanford. I'd fly back. I'm in Colorado now. I'd fly back. There'd be meetings. He'd come down from Berkeley. And we would exchange ideas and he would make suggestions. I edited together two pieces of his for my second book. I said I would like to use something on Eastern exoticism in Russian music. I would like to use it in this anthology I was assembling. And he said, on one condition, only if you edit it together with this other postscript I published that I hadn't known about. And I'm thinking, a year-to-year assistant professor edits Richard Taruskin. Oh, for the love of God, you know. But really, throughout our lives, I mean, my wife for a long time was the editor of Journal of Musicological Research, which is one of our journals in the discipline. She called Richard, or she sent Richard an email. She had a Russian article that needed reading, and scholarly thing. You get a specialist to read the article and, weigh in, reader A, reader B. She asked, I mean, this is, you know, like the kingpin, one of the real kingpins in American musicology. Debbie says, can you recommend somebody to read this? And Richard said, well, I certainly could, but I'm wondering why you didn't ask me. Debbie is floored. Well, I assumed you were busy. Would you be willing to please, pretty please, sugar on top? But he was just, for us, he was very giving that way. It was easy to be intimidated by him. So if you're a personality that gets intimidated, oh, he used to be a lot larger than he was at the end. This big Russian bear, and he'd just overcoat and he'd come in and demolish you with a couple of questions. That was teaching. I know some people have talked about he had blind spots and he could be cruel and whatever. People say that. I never saw it. I saw him as no nonsense and in many ways a real character. But he was very helpful to me, and his work was extremely important all the way through, even if one doesn't agree with all of it.
Yeah, let
And
me pause.
I missed the hell out of him.
You've been talking about him as a person, which I appreciate, but talk about him as a scholar. Why is he a titan?
Well, in a couple of different areas. Number one, he also wrote music criticism, New York Review of Books, New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. So he's also doing public musicology, and that's a phrase that you might know from this Billy Joel book, We Didn't Start the Fire. That started as a short, like a weekend scholarly meeting down at Colorado College as an exercise in public musicology, bringing the discipline to the people who listen to the music, not just specialists.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Richard started I mean, he published like all people did at that time. He published first in early music. That was a way of like bona fides, manuscripts and, old Belgian and, whatever. And that meant you were a real boy if you published in that. But he also had some very provocative things to say about performance practices and the modernism of the early music movement. So he looked at the early music movement, which was trying to get back to the original sounds and having us understand it better and that stuff. And he saw many modernistic tendencies. Well, you can imagine a lot of people got quite offended, by that idea, because it's an oppositionist position, right? I mean, it very much a contrarian. Richard had his contrarian side. So that was one thing. And there were many furious debates that were launched by that. Another one had to do with the publication of a volume. I mean, he was huge in Russian studies, as I say. There was a volume published, you may have read, edited by Solomon Volkov, called Testimony, supposedly by Dmitry Shostakovich. Shostakovich was at the end of his life, and has always been a big debate, and Richard was one of the main people on one side, that it is a spurious work. There are passages in it that he published elsewhere. But, there are some people that really believe that Volkov was not close to Shostakovich at all, and it was a dishonest work and so on. So there was a huge raging scholarly debate. By ridiculous coincidence, one of my piano playing colleagues, a Russian emigre at the University of Illinois, was one of the main people on the other side of the debate. Fortunately, in my case, I'm not a Russophile. So, I could sort of tiptoe from side to side and not offend either, maintain good relations with these people. But that was in scholarly terms, and this was quite the cause célèbre. He wrote the huge book on Stravinsky, but he had the history of Russian music going back even to the late 18th century. This was his world. And Russian is a language that a lot of people don't know so much. So he brought a lot of it to us, the Russian music. Individual studies like the one I included in my book, and titanic works. On top of that, he published in the 90s, or no, he published it in the aughts, I guess, but it was written in the 90s, the 6-volume Oxford History of Music.
Yeah.
Which it originally started, at least so I've heard, it originally started as a textbook. Richard, why don't you write a textbook for undergraduates? Okay. So it became, a huge, huge work. And it is his take on it. He's not trying to be objective. And I can't imagine, like, those of us who've written textbooks in whatever field know that it goes out to other supposed specialists, and maybe they are, and maybe they aren't, and maybe they make dumb remarks, and the publisher always says, how are you going to answer this? Well, this is a real concern. What do you think about this? Because they're not specialists. So, there's a problem with doing your textbook if you're working with a publisher who's skittish or somehow wants to make the book acceptable to everyone so they can sell more. I mean, this is a problem. I don't see Richard ever worrying about that. So he wrote this 6-volume thing, which is fascinating reading. And I've not read the whole thing. I've read around in it. There's plenty to disagree with, but there's a tone in it that he is trying to bring the issues he sees in the music of every period, and we're going back to the Middle Ages, to the learned or the curious, let's say, not necessarily other musicologists. He's trying to put it all in one for all of us to engage. Every example I've just given you is titanic. This is Richard. So he died at 77.
Yeah. What a nice tribute. And I'm my condolences to you. I know he was a friend of yours.
Yeah. Well, it's just, if you knew he was there, you knew you'd get an interesting answer, or occasionally there would be an amusing email exchange. I remember at one point we had a meeting in San Francisco. AMS was meeting, American Musicological Society meeting in San Francisco. And, the meetings are booked like 4 years in advance. National meeting, so you get your hotel, and you get it all set up, and there are, quite a lot of arrangements. Some action had started with the workers. It wasn't a full-on strike. It was something that was almost a strike. So it wasn't quite a strike, but you still weren't supposed to cross lines and whatever. And a lot of us weren't really clear about it. And it had started much after we had booked the hotel. Now we've changed our venues. Like, I guess, Ohio passed an anti-gay law at some point, and we took a major loss and moved the meeting from there. But in San Francisco, that wasn't, a lot of us didn't feel that was quite fair. Well, somebody who was involved with the workers' union wrote a couple of us a letter. Maybe he thought he was understanding something about our last names. I'll put it that way. And he started with this, you of all people should understand that sticking up for the underdog kind of thing. And I blew a gasket. Yeah, I have an allergy to this. Don't ever tell me who to hate. Don't ever tell me who to resent. So I wrote a letter and shared it with everybody else, but I sent it to this guy, basically telling him, don't you ever do anything like this to anybody again, and here's why. And Richard sent me just a little note saying, oh, right on, you sound like a character from an Odette's play. Good on you. Something like this. So there was that lighter side too.
Yeah.
But it was, knowing he was there, knowing there was a figure like that, an intellect like that in your discipline means that there's an absence afterwards. And there are others, but he was one of a kind.
I want to ask one more question of you. Your specialties are Chopin and Gershwin. Those are the two you gravitate to. What is there a connection between those two men in your imagination, or is it just that you happen to like both of them?
Well, it started out that I simply couldn't do without either. I was raised in a house, and my father at one point told me that before I met Mom, do you know we were in different parts of the country wearing out records of Oscar Levant playing Gershwin? Okay, I can understand that, I can't live without the Concerto in F. I can't live without the Rhapsody in Blue or the Second Rhapsody. I mean, they are American in a way that only an immigrant can do American,
Yeah.
Or immigrant family. I mean, he was born here, I think. But the thing about Gershwin and Chopin, of course, Chopin I discovered later, and of course, under the right guidance, I heard what the music could sound like, and that was it. It's like Billy Joel. That's it. I'm gone. I'm over here now. Both those composers tend to be taken less seriously because their music is more immediately attractive. So there is this thing in music reception where it's felt that you should have to study it and learn about it and come to terms with it to really get it. And there's a learning curve. Believe it or not, people talked like this about Brahms at a time, but think more, Second Viennese School, more Schoenberg, that's so ugly. That's because you're not man enough to understand it yet. I mean, this is the culture.
Yeah.
Chopin
Especially
and
late
Gershwin,
20th century.
Yeah. But before also Wagner,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, lots of people like this. Late Liszt. Chopin has never, as somebody else worded it, this is not my phrase, has never undergone a period of eclipse. He has his music has always sold, and pianists have not strayed from it since he published his first works. It's effective. I think, as I said earlier at the beginning, we may be, missing 60% of it, and yet we can't do without it. We can't do without that 40%.
Wait, we may be missing 60% of the music or 60% of what he was trying to do.
Yes.
Okay.
60% of, I mean, the way we play now is demonstrably opposite from the way his playing was described.
What I meant was, are you saying that perhaps 60% of his works are lost?
Oh, I see. No, there are a couple of lost things, but not most of the stuff was published, and
Got
no,
it.
I
Yeah.
mean 60% of the cultural awareness of the performance practices, and yet we cannot do without it. We cannot do without it. Gershwin, you write melodies like that. Bernstein had a wonderful essay, Leonard Bernstein, called "Why Don't You Just Go Upstairs and Write a Nice Gershwin Tune?" The moral of which was, good luck. Like, let me know how you make out, kid. Because what he was able to do was, he was soaking in, like Billy Joel, in fact, soaking in music from all around him. Remix music store, pop songs, classical stuff. And he wanted to get out of the apartment with his parents. And it's like, what is this? And all of it, he's playing all of it by ear. And, his training was not systematic. He had some classical lessons, but it was not systematic. But he had that knack, the fast fingers. You can see that in the concertos. So what do I see that's similar about both of them? Their music tends to be taken less seriously because it's immediately pleasing. Oh, John, I remember I wanted to analyze in one of my papers, choose a 20th century work and analyze. I was undergrad. I'd like to do Gershwin Concerto in F. Jonathan, I can't help but think there's something more worth your time. No, go on if you must. People tended to give me my head for whatever reason. Maybe because I raised my voice or whatever, I don't know. But, and of course, John, everybody loves Chopin, but Chopin was for the second half of your recital. No, the first half was your Beethoven, your this, your that, your Bach. The second half, Chopin, and everybody loves Chopin. So there's this feeling that because the music was immediately beautiful, it wasn't somehow as good. It was, of course, we all love Gershwin. Of course, we all love Chopin.
I'm sorry, were you describing Billy Joel? I'm sorry. Did I get confused?
Well, and another one is Dvorak.
Yeah.
Although he wasn't a piano composer, but not much of one. But
Tchaikovsky, Saint-Saëns, there's lots of these people.
You suffer if people like your stuff.
Yeah, Rachmaninoff, right. You kind of wonder what's going on. I love this music so much. Why isn't anybody talking about it?
What this is doing to me, right? This is rearranging my sinews and my tissues and my DNA. And they're all saying, oh, yeah, that.
Right.
That actually, and at too many of us in the music world and the music consumer world, listen to the criticism and say, well, don't mind me. I only like, Rachmaninoff. Yeah. And you're ashamed of that or what? Like we, as I tell the students, we occupy space and have weight. We can say, no, there's something here that I think you're not appreciating.
Yeah, and I'm an educated listener.
I love this.
I mean, I've studied. When I listen to Tchaikovsky, I'm like, no, there's lots of stuff going on here. Why is this relegated to the popular garbage can? He's very sophisticated. His orchestration is great. There's themes and development. What's going on here?
My favorite thing to use is the Little Russian Symphony, because it touches base with so many Russophile elements before and after, and nobody admits it. They just think of him as a fundamentalist.
That's the symphony where he basically invented 5 other composers.
Yeah.
I listened to that. I'm like, what is nobody? This is like symphony number 3, I think, right? Or two. Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. This is, and all we ever hear is 4, 5, and 6.
The last movement begins with the Great Gate of Kiev 2 years before Mussorgsky wrote the Great Gate of Kiev.
Right. This is odd. It's almost conspiratorial. It's just,
well, this is one of the things that is a benefit to my having been a pianist. I think I'm a very poor sight reader. I've always been. I played by ear, going back to high school. So I studied classical music, but I was always a poor sight reader. That meant for me to learn anything, it took me a long, long time. And if it takes me a long, long time, you begin to have thoughts after a while. And,
nice.
Rather than, great, I learned that, I perform it, now I'm going to learn another piece. No, it's a bigger mountain for somebody like me to climb.
Yeah.
Well, you begin to have thoughts and compare it to other things you've heard, and it takes root and takes wing in a different way in your head. And so, that's my take on Gershwin and Chopin. You work on that stuff and you just at a certain point begin to think, my God, how did they do that? Why am I listening to this over and over and over why am I drawn to this like a mouth to a moth to a flame, and yet not these other works? That why question is not going to let somebody like me alone.
If people are really turned on by the way you talk about music and they'd like to buy your books, of which there are 5 or 6, how can they find you?
They can find me on the internet. I'm still teaching at University of Northern Colorado. They can find the books on Amazon or any place. Just my last name is Bellman, like the hotel employee, and my first name is Jonathan. And more coming. I'm working on another book now, and I have something I want to do after that. And I'm not. I don't feel tired. You know.
Well, I wish I could use that energy to talk more, but I think we're going to have to say good evening, Jonathan Bellman. Thank you for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much for taking the time and inviting me to talk with you.
It's my pleasure. And we want to also thank you, audience. We appreciate your chiming in and tuning in and checking us out. We hope you're finding these conversations very interesting, and we hope you're going somewhere you hadn't gone before. If that's the case, leave a comment. Tell me and everybody else what you learned. And if you like, push that like button. In the meantime, we'll see you at our next interview. If you're a Billy Joel fan, don't forget we've interviewed both Reese Clark and Liberty DeVito, 2 of his drummers, and then we interviewed them at the same time. So there's lots of good stuff here. Thanks, friends. We'll see you next time.